Story 1. I walked out mid-shift after my boss told me to smile more one too many times. I went home, cried, ate ice cream straight from the tub, then got a much better job 2 weeks later where no one comments on my face. Story 2. The company thought I would work there forever. I gave them 2 weeks notice after years of poor treatment. They panicked and went broke. They deserved it. Story 3. I quit a job at a beer and pizza place because of too much drama. I got a job at a fine dining steakhouse. I went through their training, learned about their wines, made flashcards to study for the ingredient test, and more. I found out it would be years before I would be allowed to work the more lucrative dinner shift. If you cannot upsell, you will never make it to the dinner shift. The lunch shift paid $2.13 per hour, averaged $50 in tips, and was only around 3 to 4 hours long. Most servers had 2 jobs. I learned this because a coworker at the fine dining place asked for a ride home since he did not have a car. Everyone at the casual place could afford a car. The grass is not always greener. I asked for my old job back and got it. I stayed on for another year or so. Story 4. I was a server, and usually the way you are let off is first in, first out. I was one of the better servers, so I got the premium in between lunch and dinner shift, so I was always the first in. One day, our manager's best friend decided he was going to throw a fit about being last in and last out, so the manager switched us. This was right at the start of the dinner rush. I had a lot to do the next morning and could not be there until 1 a.m. I told the manager. He said he would get me next time. I warned him that if he did this, I was out. I currently had 7 tables. He said his decision stood. Quit. The next day, I got a job at a better restaurant making nearly double. Story 5. I had a company that never accepted 2 weeks' notice. I got a new job paying almost double but required me to move. I had a playback followed by a retrospective on Friday. I showed off my deliverable during the playback. At the end, I said that was the last thing I would be showing and thanked everyone for their support. Everyone was shocked. The big boss spoke up and asked why I wasn't giving notice. I simply said I was aware that in the past when employees gave notice, they were immediately terminated. The boss then immediately closed the playback. I went and did the retrospective with the team, said goodbye, and it was about 3 p.m. at that point. Then I turned my stuff into my boss and did a quick exit interview. My boss definitely understood. I believe they implemented a mandatory 2 weeks notice with 2 weeks pay at that point. Of course, they can't force you to give notice, but they were also promising the pay whether you had to come in or not. I wasn't worried about burning a bridge because I was moving and never coming back. Story 6. It is always for the better in the long run. I have switched jobs multiple times, and sometimes seeing my former colleagues on LinkedIn gives me a little twinge of envy. But honestly, that is very rare. Most of the time, it just confirms I made the right decision. I have more experience now, more money, and much more control over my life. For me, changing jobs regularly is how I stay sharp. Pulls me out of my comfort zone and makes me feel alive. Story 7. It worked out just fine. I already had another job lined up. My boss was trying to write me up for something beyond my control. I let her go through the entire write-up process and fought the whole time. Then she slid the paper over for me to sign. I declined and slid a resignation letter back to her. She turned beet red and was left speechless. Best day ever. Story 8. Full-time job. Less than €2 per hour. I work for a small non-profit company that offers sports classes, afternoon care, and holiday programs for children. The boss called me to his office to discuss my slacking work ethic, which was actually diagnosed burnout. I gave him my notice right there, walked out, and called in sick the next day. I never went back. 8 of the 20 colleagues quit shortly after I did. They were fed up with the boss. The company has been on the verge of collapse since then. They terminated some contracts due to a lack of employees and lost more after contractors discovered how poorly the company treated its own workers. I hope the boss loses everything he built in his life. Story 9. A woman at work constantly made a big deal about her new job as soon as she gave her notice. She talked about how much better the company was, hinted that the pay was great, and said she was finally recognized for her efforts. Then she almost immediately stopped doing any work. She was fairly sly about it and moved around a lot, but it was obvious. She was called out for it, eventually by a senior manager. This led to a dramatic scene where she said she was glad to be free of the place and felt underappreciated. During the last week of her notice, she suddenly became very quiet and actually did some work. My boss told me the new job never materialized, and she asked to stay. Unfortunately for her, they had already hired someone else. Story 10. Stormed out of a meeting where my supervisors needed me to betray several colleagues and break their trust. I resigned and handed in my 2 months' notice the following Monday. I had plans to start my own company with a friend and bring a few clients along. A perfect opportunity to follow through. I succeeded with a few significant contracts and well-known brands, which felt rewarding. In the marketing and public relations agency world, there is limited capital investment beyond office space, website, business registration, and email setup. My previous company remained diplomatic and would occasionally refer business to me, which I accepted and charged a higher fee for since it was easy income. However, after the initial motivation to prove everyone wrong subsided, the challenge of growing the business over time became overwhelming. Financial anxiety and uncertainty increased as I aged, and the work became lonely. Now, I am back in full-time employment earning a comfortable salary, feeling wiser and calmer. A triumphant, I won story would have been satisfying, but I was never a significant long-term threat to them. Still, I did not lose. I was a boss in my 20s, met my wife, a former client, leveraged my experience to secure better jobs, maintained some relationships with former colleagues, and did not fully burn bridges. Story 11. This was about 6 years ago, when the symptoms of schizophrenia were emerging for me. I was having problems with a coworker, real or imagined, I cannot say at this point. About 2 weeks prior to quitting, I had challenged him to a fight. We did not fight, and I apologized. The day I quit, it was lunchtime. I had taken my gloves off and put them somewhere. After eating, I went to get my gloves but forgot where I put them and accused others of messing with my belongings. I had also had a check stolen from my locker at this point, so I assumed I was being targeted. I exploded, yelling at my boss, confronting a different coworker than the one I tried to fight and actually liked, and quit. On my way out, I was yelling more, swearing, and all that. At the door, my boss shook my hand, and that was that. About a week later, the operations manager called to see what happened. I told him. He said it was unfortunate and that I could use him as a reference. I went through 15 jobs in a year after that and have been on disability since. Story 12. 15 years, 14 bosses. If I got a bad one, I knew I just needed to survive them for about a year, and I would have another. The commute was 2 hours each way for a part-time job, just driving into work every day. The environment became toxic. A junior colleague that I helped get up to speed and solve after-hours issues ended up being praised and promoted. When I asked my current manager about me, he said, "We are looking into it." I took all my vacation and submitted my 2 weeks' notice the day I came back. This was the same time our vice president went overseas and was unreachable, to make sure they did not try to offer me anything to stay. I took the summer off and ended up finding a local job only 30 minutes away, getting paid double my salary. I never looked back, and I am in a better place because of it. Story 13. I was working on a play that kept getting extended. They had to close for 2 weeks because another show had been booked there about a year prior. They kept me on because I was the sound technician who knew the room. They decided to use the same equipment to save time on load-in and load-out. I kept working during those 2 weeks since it was easier overall. The actor in the show was an absolute jerk. He would spend rehearsals berating me because he didn't like his headset microphone, which he had brought with him. The producer asked me for a recommendation on something smaller, and I gave it. I told them they needed to buy 3 so we would have 2 backups. They said no. The microphone broke during preview, physically broken because his dresser was rough during a costume change. The actor stopped the show and told me from the stage that he needed to talk to me backstage immediately. I went backstage, and he yelled at me about the microphone breaking. I shouted back that if they had bought more units as I suggested, we could have fixed it in 2 minutes, and now he had to use the microphone he disliked. He called me an idiot, and I stopped yelling. I said, "Have a good run with your terrible show, and lose my number." I then told the stage manager, "I'm leaving. Good luck." He said, "I totally understand." I then had a 2-week vacation and returned to the original show. It was a small production, and on 2 show days we all went to lunch, and they had me tell the story over lunch for the next 2 weeks. The show did not get good reviews and never went anywhere else. My production went to Broadway, but I did not work that leg since I was not a member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees at the time. Story 14. I got a new supervisor at a popular magazine I worked at, and he was incompetent. The company had already been reducing my hours to almost nothing over the previous months instead of terminating my employment. This new supervisor came in and started demanding I submit some work I had been working on for a few weeks before he arrived. I lost my temper and sent an email telling him to go away and calling him a New Jack Cove, and told him I quit and he could find someone else to finish the work. I copied the chief executive officer and all the other writers in the newsroom. It felt satisfying at the time, but then I looked up what New Jack meant. I had accidentally called him a jazz musician. Anyway, the other writers read my email, and 2 of the best ones sided with me and quit. The new supervisor was also fired a few months later. Story 15. Student job when I was 20. They lied about the job duties and expected me to actively scam customers. I walked out after 2 days. They withheld my pay, so I reported them to the Labor Inspection Agency. The agency then found tax irregularities and informed their tax inspector colleagues. Mistreating one employee ended up costing them a lot, and I received my paycheck after about a 1.5 year delay. Story 16. It was July when I was pushing for my contract to be renewed, so I could deny their offer, as I had a new job starting in September. I asked every week for a contract since my current one ended August 31st. My final shift was August 28th, Sunday overnight into 6 a.m. Monday morning. I took everything from my desk and locked cabinet. My own keyboard bought for work, my mouse, mousepad, and second monitor. From my cabinet, I took all my papers, paper clips, pens, and so on. The desk was a tower connected to a monitor. My cabinet unlocked with keys taped to the inside of the top drawer. I didn't answer any emails, and when it was my next regular scheduled shift, I emailed my boss. I have yet to receive a job offer to continue my career at company name. I will not be accepting another contract from company name due to how poorly I feel I have been treated these last 2 months. Never being offered a contract extension. I wish you all the best. This email is best to send the exit interview questionnaire. Sincerely, me. They never replied, but I received auto-reply emails from all 5 managers and human resources acknowledging they opened it. I feel proud of how I left that job. How do you not give a contract extension to someone working 3 years at your company and expect them to keep working without a signed contract when I gave 2 months' notice every week until I left? The new job was significantly better and a career booster. There was no middle management like in Office Space. Story 17. I rejoined a steel laser cutting company where I had worked in sales for 4 years, about 8 years earlier. Under new ownership, I became the joint general manager. However, the new managing director trusted the existing general manager more than me. I later found out she had previously been an administrative assistant for about 3 months before the new ownership. Only 1 member of the existing staff from my earlier time remained. In the first week, I realized none of the sales staff knew how to price a job. The colleague I used to work with, who knew everything about operating the machines, was basically ignored. We held no stock of materials, so every job was costly. After 2 weeks, I told them they needed to make serious changes but was ignored. Then they brought in a consultant who made even worse decisions, and I quit after 3 weeks. The company went bust about 12 months later. I saw the managing director in a shop about 2 years later. She told me she should have listened to me instead of the other general manager. She wished me well and said to keep in touch. I started my own cosmetics manufacturing business immediately after and grew it to £1.8 million before exiting. I went into that job thinking I did not know enough. It turns out I probably did. I am now the commercial director of a cosmetics manufacturer doing £3.5 million, essentially running the place. Story 18. Nothing for me. I think they realized they did not have a leg to stand on. They were already harassing me as it was, then asked me to come in on my day off to help. The other person I was supposed to help threw it all on me and just went off for 3 hours talking and did not lift a finger to help. Apparently, after I had cleaned an area, it got messed up again after I left. The manager fully yelled at me in front of people about how I was bad at my job and said it showed how I was incompetent at things at home too, making it personal. So I walked out, called my wife, and told her I was quitting. I walked back in, went straight to their office, and placed my keys down in front of her, saying, "I'm quitting. I am no longer taking this kind of verbal abuse from you and the staff." She replied, "I really thought you were a better person than this. You really had me fooled." I replied, "Well then, that makes two of us," and walked out, seeing the shocked look on her face. Nothing ever came of it. In fact, I later got a job that required me to go by there, ironically, and she just turned her nose up at me and proceeded to ignore me. Story 19. I quit my job due to being underpaid, lack of training or managerial support, disliking the industry, and losing colleagues I enjoyed working with to retirement, resignation, or relocation. I spent about 8 months unemployed, anxiously applying for jobs, and slowly going insane in an isolated apartment. Then I randomly landed a work-from-home job, making literally double what I earned previously. It is still in an industry I dislike, but it gives me the time and means to move forward. Story 20. The general manager tried to bully me during a discussion about an unfair wage situation. It became clear that he wanted to devalue my work, even after he received rave reviews emphasizing the incredible value I brought to the company and being told, "Don't you dare lose him," from both my supervisors. I told him we would not continue the conversation and walked out on the spot. That was 3 months ago. I am now in the final stages of starting my own company building tiny homes. Stressed but loving life. Story 21. Convinced my partner to quit as well. Told him that since I was leaving, they would throw my workload and responsibilities onto him. He actually ended up quitting before me because he got COVID a week before his resignation. I said my final goodbyes, and as a last act of defiance toward management, I made an announcement on the radio that there was no loss prevention in the store for the next few weeks and that the camera blind spot was in the corner by the kitchen appliances. I turned off the radio, left my keys on the desk, and walked out with my head held high. Story 22. Went home. My girlfriend came home, and I relayed the story of what had happened and why I had walked out. She became panicky, asking what we were going to do, how we would pay the mortgage, where we would get money from, and what would happen if I could not get another job. In the middle of this, I took a phone call. It was a superior job offer at a more prestigious workplace, from a mutual acquaintance who had heard that I had left. I literally had a new job unprompted, just a few hours after leaving the previous one without doing anything. Within weeks, the entire senior management at my previous workplace were dismissed, several were banned from the industry, the place was investigated for multiple instances of fraud and failure to meet required legal standards, and within months, not a single employee from when I worked there was still employed. Story 23. Last March, I confronted the chief executive officer and chief financial officer about fried chicken. It was about more than fried chicken. A short-sighted decision to try and make a quick profit instead of staying true to our community-minded values was the last straw. I was already mentally hanging on by a thread, and this was the last in a series of big surprises that were suspiciously absent from weekly meetings specifically held to discuss these types of business decisions. I was sent home, given severance, and asked to resign. It absolutely devastated me, as I had literally worked my way up from the bottom to a senior leadership role and thought it was my forever career. Seeing it from the outside now, I'm glad I was forced out. I would not have left on my own, but the environment and role were causing so much stress to me and my family that it was making me physically sick. I now work with people who value my feedback. They speak my language, and I can share ideas and challenge others without feeling like I am stepping out of line. It is not perfect, but I am also not awake for 2 hours in the middle of the night thinking about work, and I am not working 60-hour weeks. As for my former employer and the fried chicken, They recorded a $2 million sales loss this past year, for the first time in decades, while all other retailers within the system showed significant gains. Their stores now smell like rancid cooking oil, and they had to delay major renovations because of the loss in sales. Story 24. I had requested 2 weeks off in June to move my mother from Indiana to Virginia in October. It was approved in June by email. The time came to get someone up to speed 2 weeks before I left at the beginning of October. My vice president informed me that I could have Thursday and Friday off and return that Monday instead of the original 2 weeks. Let's just say, things got heated. At that point, I had mentally given a silent 2 weeks notice. I made sure all personal effects were out of my office and all commitments to my colleagues were met before the next paycheck arrived. Once the paycheck arrived, I knew they couldn't pull it back because it would affect everyone in the batch. I worked from 6:30 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. due to my commute. At 3:31 p.m., I was in my car heading home. I left my computer set up with a simple password on a piece of paper inside a manila envelope that contained my access card, company credit card, and my hotspot. I blocked all company phone numbers and proceeded out the door. The next day, the office used my emergency contacts to find out what happened to me. My family simply said I went to help my mother. A meeting was held to determine who handled what workload in our department. Each time a task was asked about, one of the 9 people in the room said, Blue XTC. By the time he reached the 9th item, he commented that perhaps I was overworked, as I had repeatedly said. My best friend was in the room, and Dolores had no filter. Her immediate response was, "You think?" No one had ever quit like that with him before. 6 years later, it is still referred to as doing the Blue XTC. Karma caught up with him last year for all the PTSD he caused people. He was a retired Marine major who forgot the Marine credo. A showdown between him and another vice president ended when he gave the owner an ultimatum about who would take over company operations when the owner retired. Let's just say he retired before the owner did. Story 25. They burn bridges, find a new job, get happy, and move on with life in a different company. They burn bridges, find a new job, experience a honeymoon period, then realize it is the same problems every day or get laid off. Now they burn bridges and get blacklisted. Story 26. I quit an advertising agency as a graphic designer after drinking a flask of scotch and flipping everyone off as I stumbled out of there. The next day, I was hired by the client we worked with. Much better pay, and the people here are amazing. Story 27. The very next thing that happened was a couple of days of being in shock and processing the decision. Then I experienced a jolt of energy to move forward in the right direction. Story 28. I walked out when the manager at Royal Mail tried sending me to another office without informing me. I resigned on the spot. I was paid for the next month without working a minute. I threatened to sue due to derogatory comments. Who is laughing now, Pete? Story 29. I walked out of a crisis center group home for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at 2 a.m. They tricked me into working there and didn't tell me it was a crisis center until my first day. It was severely understaffed and very dangerous. I finally walked out when the man who smears feces all over himself and walks around naked attacked me. We had to restrain him for 2 hours. After 1 hour, I made up my mind that the moment he got up, calmed down, and went to his room, I was leaving. He calmed down and went to his room. I then went into the office, gathered my belongings, said I was going out to cool off because I was overheated, and left. I called my wife to tell her to unlatch the door. I blocked every number associated with that place, so I never heard from them again. I received a very long text from an unknown number the next day, but I did not read it and deleted it immediately. I had been keeping track of all dangerous situations and reporting them to human resources as they happened. I had a friend in human resources who told me to text her immediately if anything occurred. After I left, I also reported them to the health department because of how they cooked and stored food. The man who smeared feces and others, who had no concept of hygiene, were always touching food and getting into the fridge. I refused to eat any food from there. As a result, many people were fired. I am not sure of the details, but I do not care. They called me a snitch constantly because they knew I was messaging human resources. It got to the point where they only called me snitch instead of my name, and I made them lose their jobs. Story 30. They called the police on me just to intimidate me. I gave my 2 weeks notice. They fired me a few days later. They called the police and reported me for trespassing or something similar. The officer did not really care about the situation, so it was not as dramatic as it may sound. Woodward Incorporated. Fun fact, they were found guilty of widespread discrimination in a class action lawsuit about 10 years ago. Story 31. Walked out as an operations manager because the higher-ups did not want to provide me with more help in a warehouse environment. My former employer told me the following week they had urgently hired 10 more people. I am so glad to be done with that field. Story 32. Walked out of my dead-end factory job and started my tattoo apprenticeship the next day. It was surreal and lucky, but I have always believed that if you stay in a bad situation too long, you will forget how it feels. Story 33. I left a paraeducator position after 2 weeks. I was under the impression that I would be working with a student with multiple sclerosis. It turned out to be 2 part-time students. One of the students was very aggressive, which triggered my post-traumatic stress disorder from a prior abusive relationship. I experienced uncontrollable crying, nightmares, panic attacks, shaking, trouble eating, and extreme anxiety. I refused to enter the school. I resigned on Monday without giving 2 weeks' notice. So far, I am transitioning into a new line of work and doing better. Story 34. The person they chose to hire instead of promoting me could not handle it and left after about 3 months. Without any senior-level personnel on board, some of their projects fell apart. Story 35. Bartended for longer than I can remember. Walked in after a day off and resigned there and then had a month of holidays saved up. My wife wasn't happy. Found a job at a school. Home every night to put my kid to bed and no longer have to deal with drunk people every weekend. It was a big risk with a newborn baby, but it paid off for me. If I pull that stunt again, I reckon my wife will bury me. Story 36. After being in an exceptionally toxic work environment, where I was overworked and treated poorly, I quit in frustration. The only reason I worked 1 extra day was because the next day had an event for Big Brothers Big Sisters, and I did not want to disappoint the children. As a result of my quitting, they had to hire 1 full-time and 2 part-time employees to replace me. Additionally, they had to cancel one of their most popular events because I was not there to manage all the work and be physically present. This all happened within 2 weeks of my returning from stress leave, during which they had to cancel another one of their most popular events for the same reason. Story 37. After being put on pay for performance at the advice of the consultants and losing $3,000, I made a decision. Without saying a word to anyone in the manager's meeting, I cleaned out everything from my office and reset my workstation back to factory settings. I then sat down with the remaining files, and when it was my turn to speak, I thanked everyone in the room and quit. I got up, left the files on the table, tossed a water bottle 10 feet to the garbage, and walked out. No one in the room spoke for 2 full minutes. I had been with the family-owned company for 32 years. Story 38. When I was 20, I quit my unsatisfactory job at Best Buy after the manager called me a bad employee for missing Black Friday because I was in the hospital with methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. I told him off and let him know everyone thought he was awful. He tried to block me from leaving but let me go right before it was about to get physical. When I got to my car, my keys and coat were in the break room. I had to go back in. The employees helped me get my things and he called the police, I believe. Nothing happened beyond that. Always have your keys with you when you quit a job in a confrontational manner. Story 39. I had been there 25 years and had worked my way up to the most senior operational role when they upset me by doing some unethical things. I felt bad for some people I knew I had left in a difficult situation by walking out, so I was hesitant to reach out. But I had done good work for enough people that within a month, both former colleagues and former customers were contacting me for project and training opportunities. I did that for 3 years and was able to support myself with about half-time work until one of them offered me a full-time job that took me the rest of the way to retirement. In hindsight, the years I was on my own, not working crazy hours, were among the most important of my kids' lives, as they were finishing school, moving out on their own, and reaching many milestones. It was great not to be so busy and miss those moments. I guess you have to know your worth. Story 40. It wasn't very dramatic, but I secured my new job and walked out on the old one the next morning. Now I earn more money and am much less stressed. Story 41. Worked out eventually. Ended up furthering my career and knowledge, but definitely learned some lessons the hard way. Story 42. I quit a super toxic localization company. I have mentioned it before, but to summarize, I had a boss who was a horrible human being. I ended up moving to another localization company that was much more professional and respectful. I am still working there. Story 43. I quit one job on day 3 when they tried to give me a warning. I had directed a person to a smoothie place rather than sell them something we made, and they wanted a smoothie. I got a job at another hotel less than 2 weeks later. I met my best friend at the second hotel. The other job was a call center position that caused me to have a breakdown a few years ago. I took time to focus on my mental health and eventually found a job working at a charity, where I still work now. Story 44. I experienced a mental breakdown and quit my job because I was not happy. Now, I earn significantly less, commute an hour each way to work, and I am still unhappy. Story 45. I was working at a large technology company as a contractor with rotating days off. The managers decided it would make sense for contractors to swap shifts on 3-month rotations. I would work from 10 a.m. to 6:30 p.m. for 3 months, then from 6 a.m. to 2:30 p.m., and then from 2 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. 2 of my 6 colleagues quit after that announcement. On my day off, one of them asked me why I did not quit, and I could not argue. I arrived early for my next shift. I emailed my superiors at the company, then the contractors who worked with me 2 minutes before my shift. Then, I walked into the office where we worked and said, "Hey, I just want to let everyone know I am quitting today." I looked right at my colleagues and said, "You have been great to work with." I looked left at the agency managers and said, "You were the worst managers I have ever worked with." I took off my badge and placed it, along with my computer, on the head manager's desk. Then I turned around, walked out, and went grocery shopping. Story 46. I walked out of a job mid-shift when they were short-staffed because they mistreated one of the permanent workers. They also moved me to a new station, airport catering, because we were behind. The manager for food inspection kept telling me I was not preparing the food well for presentation while demanding that I work faster. He walked down the hallway with me and the human resources representative, then told me that if I walked out now, I would never thrive or be hired by other employers. It was the happiest decision, and I am thriving. Story 47. The first quarterly bonus comes around. I was told my target was 75% of what I had originally been told, but congratulations, I am getting 110% of the target. I resigned on the spot and said I would put in 2 weeks out of respect, but that I had been lied to. I went back to my desk only to find that my login had been deactivated. My skip-level director walked over as I was packing up the handful of personal items on my desk and offered me a promotion 2 levels above my current role. This would have more than compensated me, but it left such a bad taste in my mouth that I said no and walked out. It ended up being a very good decision. This was at the end of 2007. The company found itself in serious trouble a few months later and needed a multi-billion-dollar bailout. My entire division was laid off, but I had already found a much better job. Story 48. I transitioned from teaching secondary school to teaching high school. I realized there were no further career opportunities after reaching the top of my salary by completing my master's degree in history. Not interested in pursuing the principal path, I attended my first job interview in the private sector and got the job after 3 rounds of interviews. I worked in customer experience outreach for our school customers. I then became deeply interested in artificial intelligence and was promoted to product manager, the sole product position overseeing all 3 products after 2 years. I am never going back to teaching and have found my dream job. Story 49. I am going to be so frank. One of my team leads was incredibly rude towards me for being a younger staff member, even though I had 2 years of seniority. When I complained to my manager that the new team lead was overly aggressive and not allowing possibly the most qualified person to operate their machinery, he simply responded, "Well, you are only a crew member." After he said that, I looked him in the eyes and said, "I have been here for 4.5 years. She has never worked at this business." He cut me off and said I was being insubordinate towards more qualified staff. She had never worked in that position before. She only got the team lead position because she was friends with human resources. After turning red from that blatant insult, I went to the bathroom, changed out of my uniform, walked back into the manager's office, threw my uniform on the desk, making sure to knock over his pen container, and stormed out. When the more qualified staff lead asked where I was going, I flipped her off, said, "Forget you," and walked out, slamming the door behind me. When I got home, all of my coworkers that I was friendly with had texted me saying I was awesome for doing that. After I left, she ended up getting fired a week later for tampering with one of the machines, so she did not have to clean it. Never going back. Ever. She got what she deserved. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.